Tammany Parish, you're looking at a taped video of just a short time ago of former St. Tammany Parish Sheriff Jack Strain being walked in to the St. Tammany Parish Jail. We had Katie Moore, our investigative reporter, confirmed with multiple sources a short time ago this afternoon that he has been arrested on several counts, including rape, incest, and indecent behavior with a juvenile. And again, this is taped that we got back into the Eyewitness News newsroom just a short time ago of former St. Tammany Parish Sheriff Jack Strain after his arrest this afternoon. I'm Danny Monteverde alongside Eyewitness News investigator David Hammer. And David, this is big news out of St. Tammany Parish today in regard to former Sheriff Jack Strain.
Right, this is big news because Sheriff Jack Strain put many of the people that are in that jail in prison before, and now he is going there, awaiting now to hear the details of the charges. We know, of course, that it's aggravated rape, aggravated incest, indecent behavior with a juvenile, according to sources telling our Katie Moore. Katie has done an incredible job over many years investigating Jack Strain for his financial dealings involving workforce release programs that he ran. As you can see here she is doing one of her interviews, and the situation now is that they've started investigating these claims of malfeasance and discovered, as she did with her investigation, that there were sex crime allegations as well. She had some interviews with one of who we believe to be one of the alleged victims in this case, Mark Finn, who detailed how, dating back to when he was 6 years old, that he alleged that Jack Strain, who was then a teenager, would sexually abuse him. And then things continued with some of the employees at the workforce that he ran. And we can also bring in now Chick Foret, WWL legal analyst, who has been taking a look at these various charges that we understand that are being brought against Jack Strain. What have you found about these various charges?
Well, the information that Katie got a little while ago was that there were some counts of aggravated rape and aggravated incest and indecent behavior with a juvenile. We're going to have to wait and see the press conference from Warren Montgomery, the District Attorney of St. Tammany Parish, and see exactly what the facts are surrounding these allegations and therefore what the charges are. Was it a bill of information? Was it an indictment? Why are they proceeding in state court now rather than in federal court? Katie has done, as David said, extensive work and research and reports on the federal court investigation. 2 of the alleged co-conspirators in federal court have pled guilty, but it's interesting that the DA's office in St. Tammany Parish has brought formal charges in state court. And the significant fact of that, or one of the most significant facts, is that we saw the video of him in his shorts getting out of the vehicle being processed in state court,
right,
not federal court.
And in terms of the procedure, is it better to be going through the state system first or the federal when you've got both set of eyes looking at you?
If I was Jack Strain, I would much rather be in the federal system than the state system. Now, that's a jail that he ran, remember.
That's what I was saying.
Many of the folks over there, as you said, are folks that he put into custody.
And what we had heard, a lot like the Darren Sharper case, where there was supposed to be some kind of a global settlement with both federal and state arms investigating, and multiple states in that case. Here, we heard that there was going to be some kind of a global process here where he would be charged in a global bill of information or grand jury indictment, but it appears that that's not happening, right?
What's so ironic about that, David, is that he has the same lawyer leading whatever team is going to be put together in Billy Gibbons, and that's exactly what Billy Gibbons did in the Darren Sharper case. Leon Canizero had state charges. In the Strain case, it's going to be Warren Montgomery with the state charges. In the Darren Sharper case, there were federal charges. Billy Gibbons is a very experienced, excellent lawyer. I guarantee you he has tried to put this global plea bargain state and federal court. But to answer your question specifically, Danny, the penalties and the parameters of the confines of imprisonment are much more severe in the state system than in the federal system, and this may well have been a shocker and a surprise to the defense team today.
And again, we are awaiting a press conference with the St. Tammany and Washington Parish District Attorney Warren Montgomery will be joining that as soon as that happens. We're expecting that in just a few minutes. But David, you did talk to Billy Gibbons, Strain's attorney, a few minutes ago. What did he have to say, if anything?
No, well, I was not able to
You were
get in
not
touch
able
with him yet. I've put out multiple requests for comment, but I know that he has spoken to Katie in the past as she's done her numerous stories on this case. He specifically, in reference to Mark Finn, who I mentioned earlier, who is one of the inmates who has made the allegation and did interviews with Katie, he has specifically said that those allegations are false. So we'll have to see if he's one of the alleged victims related to the charges that are being filed today.
Let me just say, Danny,
Yes.
procedurally, the question is what happens now? What's going to happen this afternoon? Billy Gibbons, I'm sure he's already put this in place, but if he hasn't, he's scrambling to get together bond requirements and bond assets, whether it be property bond or bondsman or cash. This is going to be, I would think, a substantial bond in state court and for him to be released.
And we're going to actually, Chick, I hate to cut you off, we're going to toss to that press conference right now.
Chris Diffelmere of the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, the Chief of my Criminal Division, Colin Sims, Assistant District Attorney Elizabeth Othman, and Investigator Vincent Saltaformaggio. All of them were crucial in the investigation of this matter and bringing it to prosecution, and I just need to acknowledge their hard work and their sacrifice and my appreciation towards them. In the fall of 2017, the Louisiana State Police, the FBI, and the IRS presented me with evidence that former St. Tammany Parish Sheriff Jack Strain had engaged in sex crimes. Over the following months, we conducted a joint investigation, brought in the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, and used the grand jury to confirm and corroborate the allegations. The results of that investigation were presented to the grand jury, which returned an indictment this morning. If found guilty of the charges, Mr. Strain will be sentenced to a mandatory term of life in prison. He has been arrested and taken to the St. Tammany Parish Jail with a $400,000 bond. I have a duty to pursue justice when a crime has been committed. The grand jury also has a duty, and when presented with evidence that makes a determination of probable cause evident to them, they returned an indictment in this matter. Mr. Strain deserves a speedy and fair trial by an impartial jury. And for that reason, I will have no further comment nor answer any questions. My staff will provide you with a press release outlining each charge and the corresponding sentences, as well as a copy of the indictment. Thank you very much.
And then that's St. Tammany and Washington Parish District Attorney Warren Montgomery with a very brief statement there in the arrest of Jack Strain. I believe he said it was a $400,000 bond he's being held on right now. He refused to answer any other questions or make any other comments besides a few brief statements that he made right then. He says we should be expecting a press release from his office in the next few minutes to spell out more of the specifics that former St. Tammany Parish Sheriff Jack Strain is facing. But again, you're looking at a live picture of Warren Montgomery as he wraps up that, again, very brief press conference on the steps of the St. Tammany Courthouse.
And Danny, you heard from Mr. Montgomery that he said that in the fall of 2017, the FBI, the IRS brought him evidence that they discovered along the process of investigating these financial crimes, these corruption crimes. They found evidence that he had committed sex crimes. So that's where the state got brought in on this in the fall of 2017. He did say that for the charges he's facing, he faces a mandatory life sentence if convicted. And it is, as you said, a $400,000 bond. And he also made the point that this is a grand jury indictment.
Right.
This was actually, we know from Katie's reporting that the grand jury was meeting on Wednesdays, so it appears that this all came down recently.
And for a lot of our viewers, I know that this is just foreign language in a sense. Chick, explain the process a little bit in terms of the grand jury and how this all works, how we got here right now to this point.
The district attorney in any parish has tremendous powers, And by that I mean that he or she can sign a piece of paper and institute charges by bill of information. This is a grand jury indictment. There are several charges that require grand jury indictments. Aggravated rape. Now remember, we haven't yet discussed what is the time of the alleged offenses. Was it 2 years ago, last year, 15 years ago? We don't know. The law has changed. Based upon what we have seen and what we have on the screen now, aggravated rape, aggravated incest, aggravated rape requires a grand jury indictment. So the grand jury has indicted former Sheriff Jack Strain. That means that it's not just the DA's opinion that a crime was committed and he signed a bill of information. It's the grand jury's decision that they have found probable cause that these offenses were committed or allegedly committed by Sheriff Strain. A grand jury indictment clothes itself with more credibility in that you have an impartial body that has heard the presentation of the evidence by the DA.
We're going to go now to hear from Katie Moore, who's
Katie.
there.
Let's see, we're going to.
Yeah, hi guys. Of course, that press conference just wrapped up a few moments ago. I am at the St. Tammany Courthouse here in Covington. Of course, we saw DA Warren Montgomery here at the podium talking. Alongside him, we had the head of state police, Colonel Kevin Reeves, who was here talking about this case and the investigation that has been unfolding over the past several years. And of course, this is something that we've been following for the past several years. Both myself and investigative reporter Sarah Pagonis with the New Orleans Advocate, who's here as well. She's going to talk with me and with you all about what we just heard and what little we heard from DA Warren Montgomery. We do know from this grand jury indictment that happened today that he is now facing charges of aggravated rape, 2 counts, aggravated incest, indecent behavior with a juvenile, another charge of aggravated incest. And I think there's a second page here that I just have to turn around, and then we can tell you that as well. Sexual battery, another count of sexual battery, 6 charges in all. And we heard from DA Montgomery that he faces life in prison if he's convicted. So this is a very serious situation for the former sheriff, and I don't think anybody really expected this to come out of our investigation when we first started it so many years ago.
Indeed not. I don't think we had a clue that there was anything other than financial questions.
Right. I mean, we initially thought when we started our investigative reporting on this in 2013 that this was a case possibly that could allege some corruption, not knowing that this would fall out from it. And that's what we've gotten from our sources.
That's right. They started out asking questions about a kickback scheme at the work release, and it morphed into some charges and allegations that he had molested underage victims.
Right.
Male.
And this, male and female, and our sources had said there were multiple victims back when we first broke this story back in November or December of last year. So this has been something that prosecutors and investigators have been working on for quite some time. And then we're hearing from our sources as well that there were some plea talks that have been going on with the former sheriff, and that those may have broken down, which is why we're now seeing this hearty indictment.
Indeed, and we're told he's picked up at his house this morning. Seemed he was wearing a polo shirt and shorts when they brought him in for booking. Does not look like a guy who was expecting to get arrested today.
Yeah, I think this really, now we've been hearing multiple times over the past month or so that the St. Tammany Parish grand jury had been meeting and had been hearing some things about this case and had been hearing some testimony on this case. So this isn't completely out of the blue, but we, are shocked, I think, both of us, by the magnitude of the charges.
The magnitude and that there were 6 charges, and that they are in fact pursuing the aggravated rape charge, which carries a life imprisonment possibility.
Right. Which, initially when we first started hearing that they were in plea talks, that's obviously what they would try to avoid.
You would think that he indeed would be trying to make some kind of a deal with the feds and state authorities that would keep him out of jail for life.
Right, because the feds, that's another whole other part of this investigation, and is the federal case that we know involves Jack Strain because of court documents that were filed in related cases that were bribery cases against 2 of Strain's former top deputies, 2 of his closest friends.
That's right, and they have pleaded guilty, and they were due to be sentenced in May, but they held off on their sentencing until, I think they said 90 days. So that has yet to be finalized.
And you know, Chick can talk a little bit more about this, but in cases like this, like the Darren Sharper case, for example, which involved both cases that were local and state in nature and federal cases, typically the state and the locals go first. So that would be an indication in this case that the state's going first. Again, Strain has not been charged in federal court, but we do know that he is the person that is named in those charging documents.
Yes, the charging documents make it clear that it is the sheriff, in fact, who is the person who was in the deal with these two top lieutenants.
So I think we still have a lot more to learn about this, and of course we will have the latest for you coming up on Eyewitness News. We want to send it back to you guys in the studio, and I'm happy to take any questions if you guys have them. Chick?
And Chick, do you have a question for Katie?
One of the things, Katie, that I'll be looking for in the indictment, and I don't have a copy of it yet, is age of the victims. Is there any reference to ages of victims in the indictment, even if you've had a chance to look at it?
There is. There is, yeah, a victim under the age of 12. So the aggravated rape charges are both related to a victim under the age of 12. And then these incest charges are related to someone who is the biological step or adoptive relatives, child, grandchild of any degree, brother, sister, half-brother, half-sister, uncle, aunt, nephew, or niece. So it could be any of those relatives related to Jack Strain that are involved and that are the alleged victims in the case.
That appears to relate to...
I know, Chick, I don't think you can hear me.
Right, well, we just related to him that it appears to relate to aggravated incest charges, and aggravated incest was repealed as a law in 2014, but there are other charges that replaced it that deal with family members, and we also know that some of those charges can be brought to deal with crimes that were committed before the change in the law.
Right, and these, from what we know from our sources, as we've been covering this, story for quite some time now, is that many of these charges and many of the allegations relate to things that happened decades ago, some of them. So, we don't know specifically what incidents are associated with what the grand jury indicted Strain for today. But as we've been reporting on this case, we know that some of these things may have dated back decades, which is one of the reasons why you see the aggravated rape charges. I mean, I think that's one of the few charges that the statute of limitations wouldn't have run out on.
Well, Katie, let me turn to Chick Foret now to ask him how that plays into things, because she was saying that we have a situation where a lot of these events date back decades, and we know that there have been some changes in the law as it relates to aggravated incest. Does that affect how they can move forward related to events that allegedly took place decades ago?
It may well affect it, and I promise you that Billy Gibbons is going to vigorously bring up all of those affirmative defenses. He's going to say that it's prescribed statute of limitations, and the law is the law, and you have to apply the facts to the law, and those are going to be affirmative defenses brought by Billy Gibbons, that those don't even apply. That doesn't even count because it's already prescribed. So all of that will be subject to litigation. And that, Katie and everyone else, that may enter into the decision to break off the plea bargain, because Billy is a really sophisticated lawyer. And if he thought there was a deal that was presented to his client that was something that the client should have taken, then I'm sure he did everything he could to convince him. It may be that the client chose not to take it because he feels like he's not guilty, he didn't do anything wrong. But all of those factors are entered into whether or not a plea bargain takes place. Katie and I discussed many times, on many occasions, the federal court case, because I think we both, and I don't want to speak for Katie, but I think we both assumed that the federal court case would go first, because the sentencing was set in May for the two co-conspirators, and we thought that for sure he'd work something out in federal court. But when Katie's investigation led to the allegations of the sexual abuse and the state charges, the whole case changed. Everything got much more serious, got ratcheted way up. The exposure for Sheriff Strain, former Sheriff Strain, got drastically increased, and the plea bargain obviously has fallen apart. Now it's a much higher price. It's like Gail Benson telling the Lakers, I'm not doing that deal, and if we come back again, it's going to be a much higher price. That's the message that was sent to Billy Gibbons, I promise you.
Well, over the decades, we've seen a number of cases where investigators, federal investigators, are looking at financial crimes, corruption crimes, and they find out about sex crimes, and they have to cut things off and move in more quickly than they had anticipated. Now, Danny, we're getting a statement from the current sheriff, Randy Smith. Is that right?
That's right. You didn't hear a lot from the district attorney when he spoke just now. We have a fairly lengthy statement from the current sheriff, Randy Smith. I'll just read part of it. He says the actions alleged against the former sheriff are disgraceful and shocking. Today's indictment of the former sheriff should illustrate St. Tammany's disdain for corruption or criminal actions of all kinds. I would like to commend the state police and district attorney Warren Montgomery's office for their thorough investigation. And again, if you're just joining us here on Facebook Live or on our app or on our website, the breaking news is that former St. Tammany Sheriff Jack Strain has been arrested, if I'm getting my information right, 2 counts of aggravated rape, 2 counts of aggravated incest, 2 counts of indecent behavior with a juvenile, and I believe there was another count of sexual battery as well.
Right, I believe there was
Correct,
1
guys?
count of indecent behavior with the juvenile and 1 count of sexual battery, if we're not mistaken.
So 6 charges total that the former
Right.
sheriff is facing today. And again, as Katie was saying, it looks like this is not anything he was expected. That video we saw at the top of this cut in, he was there in a polo shirt and shorts and just picked up by state police.
The key fact is that he was arrested at his home. I have turned in defendants. Billy has turned in defendants. If you're speaking with the prosecutors, you work out a situation. Warren, let me bring my guy in. We'll be there at 9 o'clock in the morning. We'll appear before the magistrate. Or I'll turn him in at the jail. Or tell me where you want him. So it is obvious to me that this was not expected because he was arrested at his home. The bond may have been discussed this morning, but the bond looks like it's been set at $400,000, which is a serious bond, and we'll have to see the financial resources of the former sheriff in trying to make that bond.
And how much of that goes to trying to avoid the embarrassment of a perp walk-in, something like that?
Well, obviously, you want to accomplish that goal, but that's way down on the list of priorities. The list of priorities is I don't want to be in handcuffs, not at all.
Now, I think we've got Katie Moore back in St. Tammany Parish. I think we're going to try to go to Katie right now with some new information. Katie, can you hear us?
Yeah, hi guys. I just wanted to give you a few more details that we're getting out of the DA's office. Of course, Warren Montgomery not saying a whole lot whenever he announced that Strain was indicted by a state grand jury this morning on all of those counts, aggravated rape, aggravated incest. Some of the details that we have now from the DA's office are that one of the counts of aggravated rape happened with a victim between June 1st, 1979 and July 19th, 1980. Another victim between 1975 and 1981. Another victim, actually the same victim, was also allegedly a victim of a sex crime or a sexual battery between April 1st, 1996 and July 1st, 2002. He's also accused of committing aggravated incest and sexual battery on a 4th victim. So we now know that there are 4 victims involved in this prosecution here in St. Tammany Parish of the former St. Tammany Parish Sheriff. So that 4th victim, apparently he's accused of committing aggravated incest and sexual battery on that 4th victim around June 1st, 2004. So these cases all date from 1979 all the way to 2004. So it's pretty shocking to hear some of those details and to see the length of time in which prosecutors allege some of this abuse, some of these alleged sex crimes may have been happening with the former sheriff being sheriff for a lot of those years. So much of this, if this is correct, if prosecutors are correct, a lot of this happened while Strain was apparently in the office of sheriff, because as we know, he's been sheriff for 20 years, or was sheriff before he was ousted for 20 years. So we have a lot more to learn, I think, as this case unfolds. And again, of course, we're still waiting to find out what's going to happen with that federal case. Let's send it back to you guys in the studio.
That's right. And also, before he was sheriff, Jack Strain was Abita Springs police chief as well. I'm trying to find our files where we have those years, but as you heard Katie say, this was all between 1979 and 2004, or when these acts are alleged to have happened. 4 victims total. Chick, hearing the ages of the victims, legally, how does that play into
Well,
this?
the age of the victims exponentially increases and actually are requirements of the various statutes, aggravated incest. But more importantly to me is because these are so old and the defense would argue stale, is he's going to have a defense to this. Now, the question is going to be, what's the credibility of the alleged victim? How old was the alleged victim? This is 30 years ago. What happened? So there are defenses that can be asserted by the defendant. This is far from a slam dunk. I don't think anybody should assume because of the severity of the offenses that he's guilty. But don't mistake me making that statement for me thinking that he's got the all clear, because he's in a world of trouble. The penalties or the potential penalties are obviously the most serious in that he's has the possibility of life imprisonment without benefit of parole, probation, or suspension of sentence. So this is going to be a war, a legal war in the St. Tammany courthouse. And the question becomes, is there a jury panel that can hear this case? You're going to have pretrial motions. You're going to have statute of limitations. You're going to hear so many motions that are being filed. And I've always told everyone in the practice of law, it's in both sides' best interest to find a middle ground and reach a deal. I think we've reached the point of no return, and I can't envision in my mind, certainly not a Darren Sharper type deal. I just don't know that both sides can ever get to a point that they can deal with.
And let's be clear, these are 4 victims now that are outlined in the indictment, and these charges go back to 1975. So we're talking about over 40 years ago, and they run all the way up through 2002. So as Katie said, I'm sorry, 2004. So as Katie said, part of this does stretch into the time that he was the sheriff. That relates back to the work release and the allegations from at least 2 of the employees there, and also to inmates who were under his supervision when he was sheriff.
Okay, so that's kind of the headlines as you've heard it right now. Former St. Tammany Parish Sheriff Jack Strain in custody right now in St. Tammany Parish, the jail he used to run, on 6 different charges, including aggravated rape, aggravated incest, and indecent behavior with a juvenile. We'll have much more on this story, of course, on Eyewitness News at 5 and 6 this evening, and on the meantime on our website, WWL-TV.com, and our digital platforms. But for now, I'm Danny Monteverde alongside David Hammer and Chick Foret for Eyewitness News.